So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Woodburn's Thrive in China Roundtable. As usual, before we start the session, especially for those of you that are new to the roundtable, the new registrants that are on here, if you would let me know what your backgrounds are, that would be of great help, especially if you are newbies or startups in China. It always helps us to tailor make our presentations and make them a little bit more as introductions into the landscapes that we're talking about on that day. So if you haven't had the chance to let me know or let Joe know a little bit about your background, please do so. Let us know newbies, startups, or experienced China hands. A little bit about myself. My name is Christina Kohler-Colucci. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors, and I'm a leading expert on inbound investment into China. Woodburn Accountants and Advisors is headquartered in Hong Kong. We cater to the two jurisdictions of Hong Kong and China, and our focus is 100% on helping foreign investors with their market entry and expansion into these two jurisdictions. So in terms of what we offer as services, we help with pre-investment advisory in the sense of creating business models, understanding what type of structures are needed to implement those business models. And then our core services are really the implementation of that, which is setting up companies and then doing all of the corporate administration work that comes thereafter. We also offer advisory in terms of how to scale within these markets, how to grow within these markets. And we have created a number of administrative processes just because the territory has become more transparent, thankfully, over the years. And if you're interested in learning more about these administrative processes, let us know and we can provide you the details to them. You can email me very simply at christina@woodburnglobal.com to get that done. If you also have not received a free copy of our ebook, The 10 Biggest Mistakes Companies Make in China, let me know. Happy to offer you a complimentary version of this. We also have other ebooks, and one of them is on cross-border e-commerce. So if you finish today's presentation and you just want to have a backup on that information, head on over to our website under publications. There is a specific ebook on cross-border e-commerce. So in today's roundtable, which is roundtable number 19, we're going to be talking about creating your e-commerce business model in China. What options do you have? And what are sort of the miscellaneous things that you need to know about? Now, just as a disclaimer, I am not giving you today a comparison on the e-commerce platforms or how the e-commerce platforms work. I am giving you an overview of what the e-commerce business model looks like. Obviously, to do e-commerce, you need to set up on the various China e-commerce platforms, whether that's JD.com, whether that's Tmall.com, it's totally up to you. I'm not going into those details or making those comparisons. If you want to have those comparisons, the best provider to go to for that would be to go to a TP, or to go even to a media agency who can offer you that insight. So the TPs are ultimately the e-commerce providers that help you to physically do the work when you're doing cross-border e-commerce. So in today's presentation, we're going to be looking at cross-border e-commerce in China. Now, briefly, the cross-border e-commerce regime was actually launched in 2014. In 2014, the e-commerce world in China opened up, allowing overseas sellers to sell consumer goods directly to Chinese consumers through certain registered e-commerce platforms like Tmall.hk, JD.com, these Chinese platforms that were actually located, or better phrase would be hosted outside of China. The qualifying products back in those days could be imported on an expedited basis at reduced import tax rates as compared to doing B2B traditional wholesale trade. Now, over time, there have been, or let me put it another way, back in 2014, there wasn't really any regulations on cross-border e-commerce. And over the years, there have been updates to the regulations, the latest having been in 2019. Now, obviously, since 2019, there have been little tweaks to those regulations, but those are more in relation to what the e-commerce platforms have to do, what the TPs have to do, etc. It doesn't really impact the business model itself that you want to create. So when we are talking about cross-border e-commerce, basically, this ultimately means that from your home jurisdiction, you are going to sell to consumers in China. It means you don't have an entity in China. You might not even have an entity in Hong Kong. You're doing this actually direct from your home jurisdiction or from your head office, okay? But in order to be able to fulfill this service or to implement this business model, you need to develop an ecosystem of providers that are going to help you to do that in China. So I created just a very brief list of things that popped up into my head of the minimum amount of people that you need to have in your ecosystem in China to fulfill cross-border e-commerce. One of them is you need a TP partner who acts as sort of the central arm to setting up your shop on the various e-commerce platforms, to then working with your logistics provider for the fulfillment of delivery. The TP partner may even have an arm to them that does marketing, but if not, you might want to work with a marketing agency to build your brand and your brand presence locally. You might want to have a law firm in China to review the agreements you're going to sign with the TP partner, the logistics center, the marketing agency. And then last but not least, making sure that your trademarks, your brand assets are protected on the various e-commerce platforms. And in that case, you may want to have a trademark partner, trademark lawyer specialized in that to make sure that you are A-okay in terms of marketing, having a shop online on these various e-commerce platforms. Now, like I said, this is a starting point of your ecosystem for cross-border e-commerce, okay? Now, I also just want to highlight here, I haven't used the term distributor because I want to be a little bit careful with that. In my mind, a distributor is more for wholesale business than consumer business. However, having said that, there are a lot of wholesale distributors who have themselves converted their business models into acting as TPs. And there's nothing wrong with that, all right? It's just I'm not comfortable putting the word distributor here because in my mind, that definition doesn't match. But of course, if you are in that phase where you are already working with distributors and they are open to the idea of acting as your TP partners, it's all well and good. The only thing you have to look at is really what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses acting as TP partners, because this might be a completely new world for them. And they might be starting from scratch and not really have the experience to know what is the good and bad things to do. So compare talking with your distributors to also real TPs where this is their sole business, this is their bread and butter business, where they have multiple clients that they're catering for, to really make a comparison of what are the important elements that are needed in order to fulfill this service properly, okay? Now, what I want people to be aware, because here there's 5 partners listed, right? So one thing I highlighted was doing a SWOT analysis and kind of understanding what are their strengths and weaknesses. Do they understand your sector? Do a due diligence on whether they know your industry, whether they have key tips on how to cater specifically to your industry. Do they have other foreign clients that are in your industry as well? But there are other areas that I want you to also be aware of whenever you're working with partners, particularly because you might not be hiring people on the ground to watch them over. You might be doing this from a distance. So as we all know, like any jurisdiction in the world, there are partners out there that might want to cheat you. There might be a lack of transparency with them. And obviously in China, there's a language barrier and a cultural barrier that may exist and cause differences in terms of how to do this cross-border e-commerce business, okay? For me, the most critical point is transparency. You obviously don't know what you don't know. That's a big issue in China. But this is why when you're evaluating your ecosystem, try to talk to at least 3 TP partners, 3 logistics fulfillment centers that are specific to e-commerce, 3 different marketing agencies, 3 different law firms, 3 different trademark partners, so that you can get an understanding. That in itself is a type of market research where you get an understanding of what their experiences are, what their capabilities are, and also to learn and educate yourself on how cross-border e-commerce works, okay? But what you definitely need from all of these partners is transparency. Now, in order to get the minimum amount of transparency, make sure you do your due diligence on the partners, understanding that they're real, okay? Check that they have a business license in China. Check if they've got a tax certificate. Tax certificates don't exist anymore. It's combined with the business license now. So if you get your business license, we just want to verify that it's real or not. Check for their own IP registrations, lease agreement, i.e. are they really renting an office? Financial documents might be hard to come by, but if you are trying to get references from other clients that they've been working with, perhaps you can get certain details on how successful they've been with those clients, and gaining that through certain financial documents. Other areas you might want to look at is just conduct general online searches, both in English and Chinese, using Google Chrome or using Bing to get an understanding of their backgrounds. Look them up also on LinkedIn. Check out the general fixed phone lines, that there is an actual phone line. Check the representatives of those contacts. Talk to third parties, whether it's customers, suppliers, competitors. The cross-border e-commerce world is relatively small. Everybody knows each other, all right? When you're talking to the marketing agencies, they know who their competitors are. If you're talking to the TP partners, they also know who their competitors are. So talk about each other, one to the other. Understand what perhaps are the war stories related to those companies. Check the address. You can always hire the chambers of commerce in China to do site visits to check that they're real. You might want to obtain the AIC information, which is the Ministry of Commerce. Through a lawyer or corporate service agent, you can go online and check the details, whether that company is in good standing. You might want to check the business license company CHOP, like I said. A key point, which you might not be doing at the beginning, but you can always verify it along the way, is check that the bank account is a corporate bank account in China and not an individual's. That always is a red flag for me. And again, checking the financial report. Now, if you do a check with the Ministry of Commerce, you might be able to get the audit reports if they have been publicly filed from there. So that might be a way of you to get financial information, again, to see whether they are in good standing. But please do your due diligence, right? And do your homework. You should always have a backup. We've had clients who use multiple TPs depending on the platform, depending on the product category. So the case study that I'm going to be talking about at the end of today's session is of a F&B brand that does food products and a variety of different beverage products, all the way from alcohol, coffee, juices, water, soft drinks, and they use different TPs depending on the product categories and their experiences. So think carefully about how you might want to split out the work. I know that in their journey already that they have been looking at other logistics providers to compare, because they're not thrilled of the lack of transparency that the current logistics provider is being offered, and I'll touch on that in the case study. So have a backup plan, right? Talk to 3, 4, 5 different providers that you have a backup plan in case you want to switch at any point in time during your China journey, all right? Now, when you're starting your cross-border e-commerce model, the key thing is understanding the facts about cross-border e-commerce. And obviously, one of the biggest questions you should be raising is, can my product be shipped to China? What are the benefits that my customer can get or that I can get? If my product doesn't get these benefits, can it still be shipped to China? And in that case, then what are the costs associated with doing that? So in the cross-border e-commerce realm, what you need to be aware of is that there's a positive list, which is a product list, a commodities list, where there are a certain amount of products that can be imported to China using the cross-border e-commerce model. Now, if your products are in this positive list, then you can benefit from certain import regulations in terms of tax, customs duty, etc. Okay, so if your product is in the list, just to give you a couple of benefits, one is that your product will enjoy preferential tax rates, which is a 30% reduction on VAT, as long as the transactional value to that consumer does not exceed 5,000 RMB or does not exceed that individual's lump sum quota of 26,000 RMB. So an individual in China can buy from overseas suppliers through Tmall.hk or JD.com, but they have a quota limit of 5,000 RMB per transaction or an annual quota of 26,000 RMB. Now, if they spend more money, absolutely no issues whatsoever. It just means that the VAT for the consumer is going to be higher, okay? And in a lot of instances, you might not have control over that because it's up to the consumer who is buying your product, but it might give you a sense for your business model to know that with cross-border e-commerce, you might not have consumers buying, each individual consumer buying more than 5,000 RMB per transaction or 26,000 RMB per year from you. They might set themselves a quota because they don't get the preferential VAT treatment, okay? Another thing about the positive list is that you have an ability to import your products into China through the dropship model or through the bonded warehouse model without having to apply for import licenses or import certificates, meaning your goods can go into the bonded zone freely. There is a customs clearance that has to happen, but it is on a, how do you say? It's a random pick, if you will. So not every single shipment is going to be checked by customs. It's kind of a random pick of what goes through customs and whether things will be picked out on that day. But it's important for you all to be aware that if you are in the positive list, there are these two very important benefits that are being offered. Now, there were rumors prior to 2019 that you would need special registrations of products, especially in the cosmetics and baby formula sectors and industries. Other areas were also in terms of healthcare and vitamin food products or medical equipment that you had to register your products. Now, since the latest regulations came out in 2019, this has been indefinitely postponed. And so far, there's been no news on the market in regards to these special registrations having to come through. So if you are in this industry of medical equipment, cosmetics, baby formulas, etc., you are free in that regard. Now, if your product is not on the positive list, you can still ship your goods directly to China from overseas through the dropship methodology, which is through postal and courier modes, but you have to expect that your consumers are going to have to pay higher tax rates, and there will be more time spent on customs clearance and other procedures like quality inspections and whatnot before the consumer receives it. So do your homework and understand whether your products fit in that positive list, okay? The rest of today's presentation is me focusing on the products that are in the positive list. Now, I just wanted to highlight, I just got this data today. I did want to highlight what are the most popular categories for online purchases in China as of March 2023, okay? Now, this is a survey that was done with over 1,000 respondents between the ages of 18 to 64 years old. And as you can see here, the two highest categories are clothing and shoes. Thereafter, it's F&B, then bags and accessories, cosmetics and body care, consumer electronics, etc. Okay, so I just wanted you all to have a bit of an idea of what is currently being sold at the highest volumes, okay, and values. So we're going to talk a little bit about the types of shipping models. And the first shipping model we're going to look at is what we call the drop shipping model or the direct shipping model, okay? There are two flow charts here. I'm going to start with the first one on the left-hand side, which is the direct mail model or the direct shipping model, okay? Now, how this works is your customer makes an order online. Now, usually what happens is that your TP is going to be aware of this. You're going to have an internal system with the TP who basically says an order has come in. Can you please now ship from overseas directly to the consumer? You're going to package it and you're going to do an international logistics delivery. Again, find out your logistics providers that are focused on this. The parcel package arrives then in the warehouse under the China customs supervision. It goes through customs clearance, and then there's the domestic delivery to the customer, and the customer receives the products. I wanted to highlight the other business model because it does exist. There are options around this. That is the direct shipping model with an overseas warehouse model. And what do I mean by this is that there are e-commerce platforms like JD, VIP, NetEase, Koala, Xiaohongshu, who all are ramping up their overseas warehousing facilities for cross-border e-commerce, meaning that you can actually ship that package to their warehouses overseas in Europe, in the UK, wherever they might have warehouses. And they then do a bulk shipment to China with other people's shipments as well, okay? There's then the customs clearance, the domestic delivery, and the customer then receives the products. So in that case, then you are just doing the local shipping in your own territory or within the region, and you don't have to do the international logistics to China. So I want you to be aware of these two different practices that do exist. I also want to highlight that a lot of the e-commerce platforms do have overseas offices. So it is worthy talking to them as well overseas and understanding how the flow works. Now, the direct shipping model basically is that you have an individual parcel, an individual package for a consumer, and you ship that product directly from overseas, okay? The clear distinction and benefit with the direct shipping model is that packages don't necessarily need to be checked or taxed, that customs will only do these random site inspections, and the VAT ultimately will be passed on to the end consumer once the package is being delivered, okay? And either they pick it up at the local post office or it goes and is delivered to their house, but they will get a letter in the mail, just like I do in Europe, saying, if I buy something now from the UK, the guy arrives at my door and he basically says, you've got a customs invoice of 20 euros. I have to pay 20 euros on the spot, or I have to go to the post office, pay that 20 euros, and then the package is given to me. The same will happen then in China. Now, the benefits of the direct shipping model are, one, you have no inventory in China. You don't have to worry about inventory in China. Individual packages are shipped from overseas. The second is that the packages are randomly checked. Taxes only apply occasionally, and they apply to the consumer. No stock is kept in China, like I said. If the value is less than 50 RMB, you have a tax exemption. And there's no customs inspection quarantine clearance, which usually happens for F&B products, okay? So that's the advantage of the direct shipping, but obviously there are disadvantages, predominantly the fact that the lead time for shipment can be anywhere between 7 and 30 days, depending if that individual parcel has been stopped at customs, or just generally speaking, you're not using the big DHL companies, FedEx up companies. If you were now to use the Royal Mail, it will definitely come in 30 days versus in 7 days if you use DHL, right? So the key thing here is that there are Chinese consumers out there that are extremely happy to buy from these overseas e-commerce platforms like Tmall.hk, JD.com. They want to buy the real thing. They feel like if they do it through those sites, they will be buying the real thing. They don't want to buy fake products anymore. The issue, though, is the delivery time, right? If you're buying something online, you want to have it within the shortest amount of time. So lead time to receiving the product is something that is vital for the longevity of your e-commerce business model in general. Today, we're only talking about cross-border e-commerce, which is a limitation in itself. It's a starting point to understand and research the Chinese market and understand and research the Chinese consumers. But it is not a long-term solution. A lot of clients start their cross-border e-commerce models first with these direct shipping, direct shipments, for the main reason that initially they'll have a order every so often. The question is as the orders come in daily and as there are numerous orders on a daily basis, you have to start thinking about a different solution, which ultimately then leads me to the bonded warehouse solution, which we will touch on after this. Again, for me, transparency is always important, and understanding what your consumer's liability might be or would be. So when it comes to direct shipping models, there are different VAT rates, tax rates, if you will, depending on the types of products that are coming in. So there is 15%, there is 25%, and then there's also 50%. Now, I want to highlight again, in our ebook on cross-border e-commerce, all of this information is on there. So I'm not sharing today's presentation, but you can go to our ebook and get all of this data as well. Okay. Now, like I said, direct shipping model, it is not, if you are starting to get successful, it cannot be a long-term solution for you. You will have to pivot and change your business model at some point. You can't scale and grow with this. So it is great to start off. It is great to see orders coming in. The question then that I would raise is, what is your trigger? Is it the value? Is it the quantity of orders? Is it the quantity of daily orders that will push you to pivot to another business model for cross-border e-commerce? This is something internally you have to decide on in terms of the next step. The next step is having stock on the ground in China as the quantity of deliveries, or the quantity of orders, gets higher and higher, okay? So again, here you've got two business models that I want you to be aware of. One is the bonded area import model, which just very simply means you are sending a container's worth of product into China. You're doing a customs declaration. It's sitting in a bonded warehouse until customers make an order online. And then you're doing the domestic deliveries, which means they get it within 24, 48, I believe maximum 72 hours. Okay. And again, this is a lot of the work that your TPs are going to be doing together with the logistics providers. The other option, which is one example that I wanted to highlight here, is Koala. They started this project off in 2018. So what happens is that you do the same thing. You've got a container worth of goods, you ship it to China in bulk, you clear customs. And again, some of these e-commerce platforms have created actual retail stores within the bonded zones. So they have warehousing spaces that they've turned into retail outlets where you can go to the bonded zone, you can go into these retail outlets and make in-store orders or go there physically as a store and buy things, okay? But it all stays within the bonded zone. So again, you have these options, and it is really important to talk to the various platforms. If your question might be, how do I evaluate what are the right e-commerce platforms for me? This is usually something that your TP will do as a project for you. Even your media agencies will do this, where they will highlight what they believe is a good starting point for you, whether it's JD, whether it's Tmall, whether it's VIP, whether it's, there's thousands, I mean, maybe not thousands, hundreds of different e-commerce platforms that are even specific to industries. You know, you've got, I don't know, over 10 different mommy and baby care products. So I would go to those niches versus going to the generic Tmalls and whatnot. But again, do that homework and understand what those e-commerce platforms can offer to you. So to explain a little bit about the bonded warehouse model, like I said, what it basically means is you are shipping in bulk to China, it clears customs, and it sits in a bonded zone warehouse, okay? The minimum requirement is that your logistics provider has a warehouse in a bonded not in a free trade zone, but that it's a bonded warehouse and the goods are staying in that bonded warehouse. Only when there is an order will then the logistics provider act as a fulfillment center where they then handle the packaging and, I guess, if you will, assembly and deliver it then to the consumer. Okay. Now, products can move freely in the free trade zone. They can be transported back overseas without the necessity to pay any taxes. So this is something I want you to be aware of. If you have any faulty or broken products that arrive, okay, this is the transparency that you need from your logistics provider, that they check this, that you then have the ability to then send back goods that are broken, goods that need repair, whatever else, and there are no tax implications around that. Now, this was a case with our client where the main reason why they are looking actually to change logistics provider is the fact that they have a lack of transparency over any damage that is caused to the products upon arrival. They are told way too late whether there is damaged goods, whether there is leakage. Remember, they're in the F&B sector, whether there is leakage, and it is causing a huge disruption in the order flow and the inventory analysis of what needs to be on the ground. So again, transparency for me is a huge issue for a lot of my clients, which is why this should be something you should definitely analyze with all providers is how do they report things to you in terms of damaged goods? How quickly can you get that information? How quickly do they check the shipment upon arrival in China? You know, otherwise it means that you need to hire someone who does that work. Okay, and that's where then we move into a totally different type of business model. All right. Duties are only paid before customs clearance, which means that when the order comes in and that order is then created as an individual package and it's shipped out of the free trade zone, out of that bonded warehouse, do you then pay customs duty on that amount of goods that have been sold? Okay. And the tax rates on the bonded model are lower than obviously traditional imports. Basically, you get a 30% discount of the traditional import rates. And when I say you, I mean actually the consumer. The consumer gets a 30% discount, right? Now, even if the bonded model reduces the shipping times because your goods are actually on the ground, and you know, like I said, within 24, 72 hours, your consumer is going to receive the goods, you still have to understand what your sales volume is. And you have to understand how much you're selling. You have to be very much aware of the inventory stock that's on the ground. We had a client about 5-6 years ago who's in the leather accessories sector, and they completely miscalculated their potential sales volume for 11/11. And I believe it was a ridiculous number. It was like within 1 hour of 11/11 starting, they had to close their site because they just didn't have any more inventory available. They had completely not thought about stock on the ground. They had not thought about potential sales volumes and all of that. With your TP, these are the types of discussions you should be having. When there are specific festivals like 11/11, and there are quite a few in the calendar year in China, potentially you need more stock on the ground. Yeah, you have to analyze all of that and make sure that you are taking care of that. If you are working with a logistics provider who is not giving you that transparency of stock coming in, stock coming out, and the breakdown of that per product or per flavor or whatever the case might be, you will get into sticky situations. Okay. Remember that obviously if you choose the bonded model, the shipment that comes in will be checked by the CIQ. the customs and inspection quarantine department. So that's not going to happen in the drop shipping model. It is going to happen when you do send a complete container or pallet over, okay, versus individual packages. Now, like I said, the direct shipping model is a great start because you get a grip on sales volumes, you have an understand. But like I said earlier, there has to be a trigger of when you're going to move into this bonded zone or bonded warehouse type model where you do have stock on the ground, okay? And then comes the next trigger. When do you actually need help on the ground in-house to take a grasp of all of this? And that will lead me to the case study at the end. So like I said, tax rates for the bonded warehouse, usually your consumer will have a 30% discount. When you look at the formulas in the end of the day, tax rates are usually at around 9.1%. But you also have to look at the consumption tax if you are in cosmetics, perfume, skincare. There you will have additional taxes that will apply. Okay. Certain miscellaneous points around cross-border e-commerce to be aware of. One is cross-border trade and Forex. When you are working with your TP partners, they will usually have a separate account with Alipay or WeChat Pay. And it's not going to be in your name, it's going to be in their name because you don't have an entity in China. But basically, Chinese users will pay in renminbi, okay? And they're going to be managing these accounts, all right? And ultimately, the TP is going to manage the inflow of capital from your consumers. They're going to take their commissions, and then they're going to transfer whatever is remaining out to you. Question then, again, for transparency issues is how often does this transfer happen? It's a negotiation. You have to discuss it then with your providers. You also have to discuss the commissions, which usually are a component of fixed fees, monthly fixed fees, as well as a percentage on the number of sales that have occurred. Okay. Now, customs clearance procedures, I thought it would be good to add this inside. I know that people will be using third-party logistics providers to do all of this work, but I still think it's important, again, for clarity purposes, to understand what is the step-by-step procedure, okay? So during the customs clearance procedure, the importer, which is your third-party logistics provider, they're gonna have to go through certain formalities, which is customs registration, commodity inspection, customs declaration, document submissions. There might even be a random examination of the goods. Then you have to pay certain taxes, customs duty taxes. They're going to release the goods. And then there's a foreign exchange control component there as well as part of the shipment. Okay. Now, in terms of all of this, your logistics provider is going to be doing this. A tip that I want to offer you today is that your logistics providers should be giving you a step-by-step procedure of how all of this works. And I say this because nearly all of my clients have eventually gone independent, meaning that they have set up their own entities in China to basically remove the commissions from the TPs and the marketing agencies and whatnot. You have to know this information if you're going to do it on your own. So use the third-party logistics providers initially as your educational tool to understand exactly how it works and what hiccups and obstacles may occur, okay? And this is, again, where communication is vital with them. Now, what I want to highlight about the current cross-border e-commerce regulations is the following. There is no pre-importation registration required if your products are in the positive list, okay? This means that for goods that normally would require product registrations like cosmetics products, health food products, food and beverage, medical devices. When you are doing cross-border e-commerce, you do not have to register your products. So with cross-border e-commerce, this is a huge advantage. And I say this because when you do want to register products in China, it can take anywhere between 12 to 24 months to get that product registration done. Okay. Once you do your product registration in China, your products actually, you can sell them domestically into the domestic market. Okay. With cross-border e-commerce as a starting point to selling to consumers in China, you don't have to do these product registrations. Now, I've said it as a benefit because there have been changes to the law over the years, but over time, there is a value limit relaxation for consumers. Right now, consumers are at the level of 5,000 RMB per purchase and 26,000 RMB per year to take the tax benefits in relation to cross-border e-commerce. This number is increasing over time, okay? And that's another advantage for your consumers in China to buy more from you through the cross-border e-commerce model. Another benefit is the tariff exemption and tax reduction. So the current tax policy basically states that the input VAT on goods coming in is exempted, and that in general, there is a 30% discount for consumers when they're purchasing goods from abroad through the cross-border e-commerce model, okay? I have not heard any rumors of this changing over time, but who knows how this is going to develop in the next few years as the regulations become more mature in relation to cross-border e-commerce. In addition to that, over time, they've expanded the positive list. So always check and make sure you're looking at the positive lists of today, so 2023, June 2023, to see if any new items have been added in. Don't always rely on your TPs to check this for you. Or your marketing agencies or whomever. Do this homework yourself or remind your TPs to do this for you to know whether there's been any updates and new things happening with the positive lists. The free trade zone distribution center, again, is a huge advantage. This bonded warehouse model is a huge advantage for you because it means that you don't have to do product registrations. Goods can come in bulk. The logistics providers, as well as your TPs, are then managing that warehouse, and it allows you to then do much faster delivery times, okay? And I think what's important to note is that there are free trade zones throughout China. The case study I'm going to talk about at the end of today's presentation, they have focused their distribution in Shenzhen, and I'll explain why. But you have multiple distribution centers that you can develop, meaning that you can also lower delivery time if you distribute your products to multiple distribution centers. They all don't have to go to one distribution center. So you could have products sitting in a warehouse in Shenzhen as well as products sitting in a warehouse in Beijing, okay? The last point is really more in relation to US companies. It's about the safe harbor against retaliatory tariffs. So as we know, there is trade tension between China and the US. We do know that there are tariffs that exist for Chinese imports, for US imports, etc. But those regulations are related to wholesale distribution, not related to cross-border e-commerce. There are no retaliatory tariffs if you are doing cross-border e-commerce, all right? This has been a huge advantage for US companies that are looking to start up, selling to consumers, is doing it through cross-border e-commerce to understand the market, because they do have the advantage that none of these tariffs exist. So in terms of your strategy plan as an overseas retailer selling into China, I've given you a 4-point strategy plan. One is understanding your supply chain structure, okay? And one of the biggest goals that I want people to achieve is obviously tax optimization and tax efficiency. Creating your supply chain structure should start with your TP as well as with your logistics providers. And generally speaking, in their sales meetings, they will have diagrams readily available to show you actually how it works from you in whichever country you're sitting in, coming across, having a bonded warehouse model, and going then out to the consumers. The question is understanding what are the tax implications, what are the customs duty implications, that you also know how to create a pricing model for your products, right? And when you are creating your pricing model, make sure you are comparing that with your competitors, right? Now, this is also something that TPs can do for you. which maybe some of you aren't aware, TPs can do a competitor benchmarking for you, looking at 3 to 5 of your different competitors that are already in market, looking at their e-commerce platforms. You can get a lot of data from the back end of that, even from your competitors. They can get it from you and you can get it from them in terms of viewership, in terms of sales, in terms of price points. So it's open basically on these platforms. So make sure you do that benchmarking as well as you are developing your supply chain structure. The next point, and I highlighted this at the start of today's presentation, is due diligence. Now, I've talked about it in the sense back then about people being scammed, having a lack of transparency, and ultimately just understanding who you're collaborating with and who you're partnering with. But from a legality standpoint, you should also understand who is the responsible party should a consumer complain about your product. Understanding the legislation around that, which is why it's also good to talk to a law firm about it, is vital. Okay, you need to understand with the supply chain that you're creating, with the ecosystem that you're collaborating with, who is actually the responsible party when you're selling your products into China. And the best is to understand what the worst case scenarios are. Okay, if a child gets sick from a baby formula that's been purchased online, if a faulty electrical, I don't know, consumer product, hair dryer, who is the fault at that point? It's really, really important to understand who has that liability and how that might affect you overseas. Then the next step is understanding through your lawyer how you can protect yourself in those regards. And that comes down to the contract structure that you are developing with these business partners. Which is why point 3 is contract terms. Okay, you want to have contracts that protect you as the seller of these goods. Okay, so again, get a lawyer, understand, make the lawyer understand your supply chain based on what TPs have said, logistics providers have said. Make sure you understand the responsibilities, risks, indemnities around this supply chain. Understand who has the liabilities and create contract terms that are going to protect you. One thing that people don't think about when they're doing cross-border e-commerce is the long-term development of your e-commerce model. Okay. What you definitely need to add into these contracts are exit terms. When you are setting up these e-commerce platforms and having, I don't know, a flagship stall on Tmall, it's actually in the name of your TP, not in your company name. When you are opening up these social media platforms to build up your brand presence, it's in the name of your media agency, not in your name. So the minute that you are being triggered to push yourself into domesticating your model, how are these platforms switched to you? Okay, so you got a Tmall e-commerce platform. The name of the owner is TP XYZ. How does that, because you don't want to get rid of it. You've got all this data sitting on there. You've got your consumers sitting on there. They know how to find you. You don't want to get rid of that, right? All your social media outlets are linked to that site, so people go and buy your products. You don't want to start fresh. You want to continue it. So how do you then change that, right? How do you inform Tmall that actually you're domesticating your business and you want your name to act as the owner on those platforms? The same with the social media sites. That should all be part of your contract terms. Okay. And point number 4 is having an internal compliance program. And again, this is hard to do from when you're abroad, right? It's hard to monitor. It's hard to control. And probably all you're concerned about is value of the business, volume of the business, the quantity of orders that are coming in, how well you're getting known. You're probably not focused on the bad details. I say bad like this in terms of complaints, in terms of compliance risks, whatever the case might be. So make sure you are developing an internal compliance program. You will need that once you domesticate your business. So start already at this stage with the cross-border e-commerce, that you have something to control them. And people, we don't have any more excuses. Borders are open. You can travel to China. You can check out your providers frequently enough that that is already a form of a very simple form of compliance. So make sure you're doing that. Now, I wanted to highlight a case study, and I want people to be aware that Ricardo, who is the MD at Zig Ventures, he has done an interview with me. It's an hour and 16 minutes long. It's on our YouTube channel under the China Experts. It's got over 250 views, 279 views. I highly recommend you to watch it. Ricardo is my e-commerce case study. It's a beautiful story in terms of what can go wrong to how things can then go right. In terms of this case study, how it starts, so I just want people to be aware of this. It's up on our YouTube channel. But to talk about the case study, basically, he started off in China with the cross-border e-commerce model. They used their UK TP, who had just recently opened up an office in Shenzhen, to start their China business. Their TP in the UK said, we've just opened up a China office. Why don't you guys try and see whether China is potentially a market? They've never done research. It was really a push from their TP to kick it off. So they started to work with the Chinese team. And 18 months in, they had tremendous volume of business. They only sold one flavored juice. That's how they started. And the volume and value increased tremendously within 18 months, but they didn't understand why. They had no data to understand how did this phenomenon happen that we're garnering so much business. They had no information from the Chinese TP. They were not getting any data. All they understood was that the shipments that were being shipped over were being sold straight away and that they had to consistently ship more. I mean, all good news. Now you can take one approach, which is to say, I'll be naive and I don't care. I'll let them do what they're doing. It's working. And we'll just let it be. You can also take the alternative approach and say, my God, if this is happening for one flavor of juice, what is the potential for all of the other flavors plus all of the other food and beverage products that we have, right? But we can't bring those in if we don't understand how this phenomenon has worked, all right? So they started asking questions to the TP, never getting any information. I mean, the lack of transparency was phenomenal. He asked to get a P&L for this product. He wanted to understand how the actual flow was working. What are the details? He wanted to know everything, right? And they couldn't give it to him. So he started coming to me predominantly to say, what are my options now? Should I buy this company? That was their first mindset was, actually, this TP is not doing so great. We're their sole client at the moment. They haven't been able to garner more clients. I'm actually interested in buying them out. And I said, well, if you're not getting any transparency and your P&L can't be read, what's the point of buying them? The due diligence just on them will be phenomenal. You're spending a lot of money. Why not set up your own entity and take over that business and have that control? So they mulled it over, and actually they were very quick in mulling it over, and they made the decision that was the right path. So they actually decided to domesticate the business. They set up a Hong Kong company to handle all the cross-border e-commerce business as a market research testing to see whether the products would work in China or not. They then set up a Chinese entity in order to then do the product registrations for those products that were actually successful, to then be able to do B2B wholesale trade, as well as then domestic e-commerce, so no longer cross-border e-commerce. It also meant that they had to modernize the logistics infrastructure for both Hong Kong and China. They also changed TPs because obviously their TP was lousy. So they evaluated the whole TP world. And this is where they decided, depending on the type of product, they would use 2 to 3 different TPs based on their expertise and their experience. And slowly, Ricardo moved to Hong Kong. He built his whole financial head in Hong Kong with financial analysts who were actually analyzing the data about sales, going into the details about different flavors, that they could really understand what's working, what's not working, and what has to exit the market so they don't spend more money on it. In China, they've got the whole brand management team doing all the social media. So they've brought all of that aspect in-house now, not using media agencies any longer. So all the brand managers are in-house managing the different brands, the different brand strategies, the different brand promotions, etc. So it's been a slow progress, but they had to fail initially with the providers to then find new providers and domesticate their business. And they've done it product by product, analyzing each product as they have grown up. Again, I highly recommend you to watch this interview. It does share a lot of the war stories that Ricardo went through. Again, go to our YouTube channel, just type in Woodburn Accountants and Advisors, and go to the playlist for the China experts and take a look at the recording. Invaluable insight into a startup for cross-border e-commerce and then moving into that domesticated world. And that would be the next step ultimately, right? If your volume orders are going up, the question is, do we register our products in China? How do we register our products in China? Do we have to register our products in China? There are obviously certain product categories you don't have to. And how do we then do domestic e-commerce and potentially even wholesale or retail, right? Who knows in what direction you might end up going into. But listen to that case study so you get more insight into that. I hope you've enjoyed today's session on the cross-border e-commerce world. If you do have any questions, let me know. And again, as usual, I'd love to hear your takeaway in regards to this. And if you are struggling to create your China e-commerce business model, in the link to the recording, I'll be sending an email later out. You can set up a call with me one-to-one, and I'd be happy to discuss what pain points you might have in terms of cross-border e-commerce. Last but not least, our roundtable for next week is all about saving your brand assets in China, registering your IP, making sure you guys get this done. You have all subscribed, so it's every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Central European time. The link is exactly the same. If you have friends, colleagues who you think will benefit from this, ask them to register. And ask them to join then next Wednesday at 1 p.m. Central European time. There are no questions that have popped in. So if there are none, then I'll stop today's presentation. And I look forward to seeing you all next week. And like I said, if you have any questions, happy to have a one-to-one. Have a great day. Take care and goodbye.